Welcome everybody to the March edition of the Sci-Cafe. The Sci-Cafe series is the Apalachicola National Estuarine Research Reserve's virtual platform to share information. It's a series that we do monthly to talk about the science that's being conducted in around Apalachicola Bay in a more informal setting. We should have time at the end for questions. We'll go for about an hour. And I've got to warn you, we're having some bandwidth issues, so I'm going to turn my camera off. And I wanted to introduce our speaker today. Today's topic is prescribed fire use in land management. And Megan Lamb is the Reserve Stewardship Coordinator, and she has served a lot of roles in the Research Reserve, but she's currently our Stewardship Coordinator. She has a BS in biology from Wesleyan University and an MS from University of Florida Fisheries and Aquatic Resources. And we're going to talk about how fire is a land management tool. So Megan, I'm going to let you take it away. I'm going to shut my camera off and everything else I can. So.
Thanks, Anita. Hey, everyone. I'm glad to be with you today. I'm also going to shut my camera off when I get into the PowerPoint presentation, just because we have been having bandwidth issues. So I'll go ahead and do that now. All right, well, thanks for joining us today. As Anita said, I'm going to talk a little bit today about our use of prescribed fire at ANER. And to just kind of go over an overview of what I'll be talking about today, I'm going to talk a little bit generally about what prescribed fire is, our fire history here in North America, and the historic ecosystems that appeared here before we changed them a little bit with our fire horizon and development. And then I'm going to get more specific and talk about our managed lands here at the Apalachicola NER, and I'll probably refer to us as ANER for short. Saying Apalachicola National Estuarine Research Reserve is a bit of a mouthful. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what our management goals are and how that plays into our fire program, and then also our fire team here at ANER, as well as our partnership fire teams. And then I'm going to talk about two case studies of fire management here at ANER, our Nix Hole managed area and Little St. George Island. And within those case studies, I'll talk a little bit about how we monitor the effects that fire has in those managed areas. And I'm really sorry, I'm not sure why it's jumping in and out of the presentation mode, but hopefully it will stay in there. And then just mention briefly a few more land management tools we use when we can't use fire or in addition to fire, and then give people an opportunity to ask questions. So first, I just want to talk generally to define prescribed fire, what it is and how we do it in very general terms. So prescribed fire, by definition, is the controlled application of fire by a team of fire experts under specific weather conditions. And you might also hear it referred to as a controlled burn or a prescribed burn. And why we even do these prescribed fires. So prescribed fire has a lot of benefits. One of the main ones is that it reduces built up fuels, and that reduces wildfire risk. We also burn to promote ecosystem health. So Florida upland ecosystems are considered pyrogenic. They depend on fire, and so they actually evolved to rely on fire. Under natural fire regimes, which were mostly, lightning strike fires, these communities evolved to live with the fire, and some species will actually only germinate for example, when they experience the heat of fire. Um, Fire can also promote rare plants. They may need the heat of the fire or open areas to germinate. Fire can reduce invasive plant species and other nuisance species. And fire can be used as a tool for very specific wildlife management goals. So game species is an example here. Some species like quail will only nest in areas that are open that recently experienced fire. So if you're managing an area to promote a specific game species, you might want to use prescribed fire to help with that species. Now the image on the left is it's the anatomy of a prescribed burn. And so this is just in a very simplified way to explain how prescribed fires occur. So if you see number 1 here, this shows a natural fire break, a water body. This could be a created fire break, like a fire line or a road. But so when we set a prescribed fire, from that first fire break, we set a backfire. And you'll notice the wind direction is going, I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, but in the wind direction, this picture, it's going left to right. So the backfire is firing against the wind direction here. And you notice that there are crews on all sides monitoring the fire, and you have some kind of line on all sides of the fire and monitors to make sure the fire doesn't cross those lines. And then once the backfire has started sufficiently, you'll set a head fire on the other side of the burn. So the head fire, because it's going with the direction of the wind, may be a bit stronger, but by the time it meets with the backfire in the middle of the burn zone, the high intensity fire will be in the middle of that zone, and you'll have a nice black line around it, which keeps it from getting out of the intended fire zone. So that's just a very simplified explanation of how a prescribed fire physically may be set. So getting a little into our fire history in North America. Several hundred years ago, before European settlement, there was a lot more forest on the continent, and there were a lot more natural wildland fires that were mostly caused by Mother Nature, by lightning. And as Native Americans that lived here and as European Americans settled the area, they fought fires that threatened villages or settlements, but may have let other fires burn. And this may have been a deliberate ecosystem manipulation, but also you have to think about it might have just been out of necessity, what equipment may have been available or other tools at the time. But since European settlement began in North America, there became more and more of a culture of wildfire suppression. Fire was thought of as bad. And the first US wildfire control program that was established in 1885, their mission was to extinguish all fire. And the US Forest Service that was established in 1905 was established for fire suppression. And out of this is kind of where, a lot of us grew up with this, this Smokey the Bear idea. You see, the picture on the right, the 75th anniversary was a few years ago, but if you think of the logo that we all heard, when we were kids, only you can prevent forest fires. So it was a very black and white way of looking at fire. But then in the late 1960s, the National Park Service actually recognized that fire was a natural process and began letting some management zones run their course under prescribed conditions. And so there's really been a change in thinking that's occurred over the last 50 years that, not all fires are bad. And in fact, fires may be a positive tool that we can use, again, to hit those goals that I mentioned, to promote ecosystem health, and also that prescribed fire might help prevent out of control wildfires, so it could actually be used as a safety tool. So in the Southeast, our historic ecosystems were longleaf, pine, and wiregrass ecosystems. They dominated the coastal plain. There were once over 90 million acres of this longleaf and wiregrass savanna in the southeast. Um, and this picture on the right shows kind of what they would look like, although, I was searching for photos to use. I actually, the longleaf pines would really be pretty far apart, and there is a very open wiregrass savanna understory. And so even in this photo, I'd say those trees are probably a little close together for what we might have expected to see. The longleaf pines were really well suited to the southern climate. They had deeper roots that made them wind and drought resistant compared to other pine species, and they were adapted for fire. They're also a pest resistant species, and considered by some a keystone species. So longleaf pine savannas were home to some now very rare species such as red cockaded woodpeckers, gopher tortoises, indigo snakes, and other carnivorous plants. And wiregrass carries fire naturally. I'm sorry, I'm not sure. It's popping in and out of the slideshow again, and I'm not sure what to do about that or why that's happening. So apologies. But longleaf is, it's called heart pine, and it's got a large center that has very little surrounding sapwood. So this makes the wood dense, heavy, and it's, as being insect and rot resistant, it's a very desirable building material. And so longleaf were logged for building materials and also cleared to make room for settlement. And when they were replanted with loblolly and slash pine, which grows faster, and wiregrass was often not replanted in these areas. And trees were planted more densely, so this was all to produce more short-term economic benefits. Now, of course, in coastal areas like ours, we do have more of a mosaic of habitats. We have coastal marshes, cypress swamps, and transition zones between upland areas and the marshes. So there is, a little bit of more mosaic of habitat, especially as we get down to our coastal areas. But as development occurred and there was this changeover from longleaf to densely planted slash pines, and also the change in the fire culture that I discussed, fire was suppressed in these habitats. So now zooming into the Apalachicola Nur. On the left hand, you'll see an image of our boundary. And on the right-hand side, you'll see our boundary is also indicated here. But I just wanted to kind of put into context where Aner is. We are nestled amongst many conservation land areas. So the state forest, the national forest, several FWC managed areas, the Apalachicola River, WEA, and Boxar WMA, and then the water management district land that is within Aner bounds. Our coastal area has a lot of undeveloped land and forested area. So fire is very much a part of our horizon here down on the coast. And then just to make one more point with this figure, I did want to show you, so the Apalachicola Nur is quite large, but we do have a mosaic of areas within our boundaries. Some are managed by others. So the Apalachicola River Water Management Area, for example, is managed by the Water Management District. We have St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge within our bounds, and so on. And then the areas that you see in blue in this diagram are areas that we manage directly. So within our bounds, we also have separated lands that others manage and lands that the Aner staff manage directly. And then to just zoom in closer to those areas that we manage directly. So we directly manage upland areas of about 6,800 acres. And so we have two larger parcels that we manage, the Lower River Marsh area and Little St. George Island. And then besides that, we have these much smaller parcels. So we have a couple spoil islands, Bird Island and the St. George Island Causeway, and then the Sawyer Street Kayak Launch, which is a very small area. And then we have our three areas that are embedded within developed areas over at Cap Point, where our nature center is, and then Nix Hole and the Unit 4 Church of God area on St. George Island. So having these areas divided up into smaller parcels, when areas like that, we really see a lot of fire exclusion in these areas, which result in large fuel loads and reduced biodiversity. And so staff have been working to slowly introduce, not reintroduce, prescribed fire into managed areas over the past decade as site conditions allow and staff are able in these areas. Now this is the same map, but this is the map as it exists in our fire management plan. So we have a fire plan that's part of our management plan. And in the fire management plan, all of the zones that we manage are broken out in more of a fire lens. We look at acreage. Each site has a site description, which includes the management goals for that site, the intended fire frequency, ecological community descriptions, because that's something we need to know for fire, and then fire history, both wildfire and prescribed. And then if the area were to have prescribed fire applied, we look at the prescribed fire or the desired fire conditions, which include weather. That includes things like wind direction, humidity, wildfire protocols, what we would do if there is a wildfire in that area, and then other notable information for each parcel and subparcels that you might need to want, or you would want to know if there was a fire, either prescribed or wild in the area. That might include things like locations of power lines, or where there's neighbors and houses nearby, and that kind of thing. And so to get into a little more of the management goals I mentioned, when we say management goals for a fire area, so management goals may include things like reduce wildfire risk and to promote ecological health, but those are really pretty broad management goals. And so when we get a little more specific, to make up those goals, we really try to consider, what we want. We think about the applied research and science, that what is science telling us this type of community, what type of fire regime would promote the community that we want to look at. We say desired ecological community. That's kind of a, what does that term really mean? In Florida, we have a group called the Florida Natural Areas Inventory. And so they will help people assess what historic ecosystems occurred in certain areas. And so you may make your management goal to return an area to that historic ecosystem, and then think about the management activities that you can take to make that area more like that historic community. And we also need to look at wildfire risks and wildfire history in an area when determining management goals, or neighboring human communities. And we have to balance those management goals with the resources that we do have available. And then Mother Nature, I always throw Mother Nature in, because the best laid goals and plans can always be affected by Mother Nature. And so the images at the bottom, I just want to show you these are tree rings. And so I just want to mention this really cool research that some researchers who are now at the Tall Timbers Ecological Station do. Dr. Jean Huffman used to be the manager of the St. Joe Buffer Preserve and now works up at Tall Timbers. And she studies tree rings And with tree rings, you can see fire scars in these rings. So the zoomed in picture on the left shows fire scars. So if you have a tree ring from a tree that's several hundred years old, you can see the evidence of fire in that tree ring. And what that can tell us is the natural fire frequency in that community. So it can yield some really interesting research. So it's research like that that we use to try to apply and come up with appropriate management goals for these areas. And then this is just kind of your Prescribed Fire 101, the basic tools that you need to apply prescribed fire. You need a certified burn manager, aka your burn boss, and a crew to do it. We need a lot of equipment that includes, vehicles, tanks, hoses, hand tools, an igniting device. The picture on the upper left here shows a Aner staffer holding a drip torch. And so a lot of people don't know what drip torches are, but that's your hand tool that you use to apply fire. There's fuel inside there, and you can just light the wick on the end of the torch. There are a lot of other things you can use to apply fire. And some of these large burns, especially in the forest, you might have aerial ignition, so you wouldn't be using a drip torch for that. But that's just the basics. And then our team and our staff, once you have to have your initial fire training, but then there's also yearly refresher requirements. On the day of the burn, you need to have a burn authorization, which comes from the Florida Forest Service. And that's they're broken up into regions. So your burn boss or burn manager will apply for that burn authorization, and it's really the morning of the fire. You probably do have a good idea if you can get it or not before that, but certainly, some burns are planned for and everything's ready, and think that weather conditions are right, but the burn authorization is not given. So that can be a disappointment, but that's part of the game. And then smaller organizations like Aner, we really rely on partnerships and shared resources to accomplish our prescribed fires. Our stewardship staff is three people. We're all crew members, and we have one of them is a crew trainee, our newest staff member. And then we have a few other staff at Aner who are certified for prescribed fire, but it's just you have to look at availability. Sometimes people are working on other projects some days. I think about that. And then our burn boss currently is the manager over at the St. Joe Buffer Preserve. So he serves as burn boss for our fires here on Aner managed lands. So we are part of the collective Aner St. Joe Bay Buffer Preserve burn team. But we also have partnerships with the Conservation Corps of the Forgotten and Emerald Coasts. So the Corps members are all certified crew members. That's one of the first things that they do with new Corps members is put them through fire training. And then Aner is also part of the Apalachicola Regional Stewardship Alliance, or called ARSA. So we have members of different agencies, public and private, all over the region. And so groups like this, we share resources, including personnel and equipment to conduct a prescribed fire. We wouldn't be able to, conduct our burns with only the resources Aner has, but these are members of ARSA and the Conservation Corps and the Buffer Preserve help us when we do our burns, and then we go help them when they do their burns. During the fire season, there's a lot of emails going around, hey, I'm planning a burn and I need 12 crew members. And so I just wanted to point out that this is very much a collective process. But yes, an organization like Aner could not conduct fires without these shared resources. Okay, so looking at prescribed fires at our areas, when we also have to make a lot of preparations and conduct maintenance on these areas before we even think about fire throughout the year. We have fire lines are a break in fuel. They're also called fire breaks. So it's an area with no fuel where a fire may be stopped. And we have delineated fire lines and fire breaks in all of our managed areas except the lower river marsh. It's just because it's a watery marsh area, so it makes it impossible to create fire lines there. Although other natural barriers such as the water may serve as fire breaks in that area. But fire lines are maintained twice yearly and then prior to burning. And fire line maintenance is also essential in case of a wildfire. So if you do have a wildfire, if you have a good fire line, that might be a place you can help use it to contain the fire so it doesn't spread further. And then prior to actually conducting a prescribed fire, you do additional site checks, clear any other items and things you might need to be mindful of, dead snags near the fire lines because they will burn for a long time and could spread embers across the fire line. If there's utility lines in an area or utility boxes, maybe you need to clear the brush mechanically around a utility box. You wouldn't want to burn right up to a utility box. This one picture shows, the pine tree has fallen across the road here. So to keep the road or the fire line clear, need to cut down the tree. And then we also do a lot of community notifications in addition to the more kind of general outreach and education. If you are, especially if you're burning in an area that has a community living nearby, you want to notify everyone so everyone knows what's going on, and think about things like traffic control if you're burning near a road and so on. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the case studies, some fire in two of our managed areas. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is the Nix Hole area, which is located on St. George Island within the plantation community. So as I mentioned before, ANER goals include reintroducing fire where practical to our managed lands. ANER acquired these parcels throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s. This area had no known fire history at the time, prescribed or wildfire. But Nix Hole was identified as a sensitive ecological area and a significant source of freshwater runoff into the bay, and that's what led to the state acquisition of this area. So with this fire awareness and desire to reintroduce fire, in 2013, ANER began coordinating with the Florida Forest Service regarding what appropriate fire breaks would be in the area and planning for a prescribed burn. So the first prescribed fire was conducted in zone 4B, so it's the large green zone in the middle here, which is the bulk of the area, in 2015, and it was conducted by the Forest Service with help from ANER. And then since then, ANER has been able to, and the St. Joe team, have been able to conduct prescribed fires every 3 years. So 2018, 2021, and we are planning for this month or next month. We are trying to burn the area again. We're on schedule for this year, but the weather has not cooperated so far. And in this fire zone, the goals are fuel reduction and then the ecological community health. So ideal burn conditions in this area include south-southeast winds, and that would keep the smoke off of the main road and send it more out into the bay. When ANER started burning this site in 2015, there was a lot of built up underbrush and fuel, a lot of vines around trees, which are considered ladder fuels. That is, they can carry fire up into the treetops, which can create dangerous situations. And over time, now that there were 3 burns into this area, the understory has been reduced, and the ecological communities are looking great. And then we can't talk about burning next hole without mentioning that, this is, as I mentioned, we do a lot of community outreach and have a lot of conversations. So we work closely with the St. George Island plantation staff, the residents, the volunteer fire department, and other partners to raise public awareness and coordinate prior to and during each prescribed fire in this area. Um, so these are just some photos of the prescribed burns over time at Nick's Hole. So the top left and top center photos were taken in the first year of the burn. And so you can see in these photos that there's really quite a lot of thick underbrush here. And there's a lot of vines. You can see a lot of the vines reaching up to the treetops that I mentioned. So there was really a lot of underbrush in the area. And then the other photos are from after burns and some of the later burns. The picture on the bottom right is one of the crew members. This is the area of the fire on the east side, right next to the airport runway, if you're familiar with the area. And then, so to just go into a little bit of how we may monitor the effects of fire in the areas. When you're doing managed areas, you can use something called photo points to help you monitor changes in an area over time. So a photo point is a photo taken at an area of interest repeatedly over time, and they may be taken in certain directions or the cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, or you can also have 360-degree photo points. So in the Nick's Hole area, we have 6 photo points that were established in 2017, and these are cardinal direction photo points. And then ANER staff collect photo points twice annually, and then also more often when disturbances like fires occur. And so these 6 locations in Nick's Hole were chosen to monitor the marsh areas and then interior upland habitats. So as I mentioned, they were established in 2017. So they don't include photos prior to the first prescribed fire in 2015, but they do occur after that. And so I'm going to switch out of this PowerPoint quickly and give this a minute to change over to show you some of our photo points. So this is Nick's Hole photo point 4, and it's facing the east direction. The first photo point that you can see here is in June of 2017. So it's about 2 years after the first prescribed fire in this area. And this is December 2017 is the next one. So you can see kind of some open areas and some undergrowth and brush present. So this is March 2018 is the next one. This is 1 month after a prescribed burn was conducted in February of 2018. So this was one of our extra photo points. We went out and took in addition to the twice annual photo points. And then this is May of that year, and you can see the area's all already greening up. And that really shows, prescribed fires, if they're done frequently, they're supposed to be low intensity fires, and this doesn't kill vegetation. These pyrogenic communities can withstand this low intensity fire. You can see there's some fire scars on the trees, and the palmettos, the leaves that are present are burned by the fire, but they'll come right back out and start greening back up. So this is the next spring, June of 2019, so almost a year after the last photo. Looks like we missed the winter one there. And just the community's just growing up a bit. December 2018. You can see this is right next to one of the trails in the area. Off to the right in the distance, you can see one of the trail signs. June 2020, and the winter again, this photo is a little offset to the side. And then February 2021, so this is right after the next prescribed burn. So you can just see that with each fire, you know, the vegetation is reduced and areas are opened, and things will slowly regrow over time. It's grown up again. Oops. And then our last photo point here is from January of 2024. And I hope the next one, if Mother Nature cooperates, will be of a nice burned zone. But we'll just have to see if we are able to burn it this year. And if not, we will just regroup and try for next year. But hopefully it will happen this spring. So we'll continue on to the next managed area, Little St. George Island. So Little St. George Island is I'm sure many of you local audience are familiar with it. It's one of our barrier islands. It's to the west of St. George Island. Aner acquired the island in 1977, or the state acquired it, and Aner started managing it in 1977. So historic use out here, we have evidence of subsistence use by indigenous communities. And then the lighthouse and lightkeeper structures were on the island for almost 2 centuries. Turpentine harvest occurred on the island. It was a training area during the World Wars. And Little St. George Island was separated from St. George in 1954 with the dredging of Bob Sykes government cut. There's one homestead on the island, and the structures at that homestead include the historic Marshall House and associated outbuildings and a barn. And the lightkeeper's house no longer remains. The lighthouse fell down in 2005 and was rebuilt on St. George Island. So most of the island is covered by natural communities. The habitat types include dune and swale topography. So the high sandy dune ridges support scrub and scrubby flatwoods, slash pine, saw palmetto, and scrub oaks. This type of natural community burns pretty poorly unless fuel has been allowed to accumulate over long time periods. But then the swales between include finer fuels, mostly sawgrass, and finer fuels like sawgrass will burn more frequently because they carry fire quite well. There's also, of course, transitional areas between these uplands and lowlands, and some marsh areas on the islands. And so actually this is an interesting island because for management purposes and fire management, we kind of split it into 2 areas. So you can see this zoomed in area showing these F fire zones around the Marshall House. So we conduct prescribed fires in this area specifically every 3 to 5 years to reduce wildfire risk around these historically important structures. And this is an area where, you know, it promotes ecological health, but our primary goal for this area really is to help reduce that wildfire risk for the structures. So Aner conducted prescribed fires in the F zone areas in 2016, 2019, and 2023. And then the rest of the island and zones A through E, we don't plan prescribed fires in these areas. But if a wildfire occurs, we allow it to burn on its own, unless, with the exception of conducting activities that will protect the Marshall House area if needed. And that the natural wildfire regime is for the promotion of ecosystem health. And the island has had wildfires in 1999, 2007, 2009, 2017, and then 2023. And, wildfires on a barrier island, as I mentioned, the dune and swale topography, and the fires can really meander around, and a wildfire on an island like this can last for days. And so since it's an island in the middle of nowhere, we allow it to burn naturally, with just the concern would be if it does um, threaten structures. Oops. Okay. Sorry, I went too a little too fast there. So these are some photos of the recent prescribed fires around the Marshall House area. So again, we're trying to conduct a prescribed burn on the natural communities while protecting the structure areas, and as well as our educational signage. And I also wanted to point out the picture in the middle and the bottom also just shows when we are conducting prescribed fires, we have pretty limited resources out on the barrier island. So we use the gator pond that's near the Marshall House as a freshwater source. And then we also do have running water at the house that is from a well pump. We use that to fill these water tanks that usually we have 2 available mounted on the back of UTVs. And then we have a hose lay around the structures that's fed from a pump that's in the pond. So this, I believe all of these photos are from the 2023 prescribed burn that we did in November out there. Excuse me. Um, and then on Little St. George Island, we also do photo point monitoring. For time's sake, I'm not going to jump into the photos for the photo points, but I also wanted to just kind of point out there's a difference between, say, these photo points and the ones at Nick's Hole. So photo points, they're not used just for fire. They can be picked to show any kind of area of interest. So a lot of the Little St. George photo points are not in extreme interior areas. A lot of them are used to show kind of differences, coastal erosion and changes at the end and the beach side of the island. So you get a very different picture depending on, where your photo points are in your managed areas. And so when you're picking locations, you really have to think about what you might want to capture. Of course, you can't anticipate all change, um, but these ones, we have some pretty dynamic photo point differences. For example, from before and after hurricanes are shown really well in the Little St. George ones. Um, we also, another tool that we use after conducting a prescribed burn or in a wildfire, we create a fire map. We do a lot of, post-burn talks and recording of, maybe things to do differently next time, things that went really well, and have a lot of communication after a prescribed fire. But we like to create burn maps to provide information for future managers for both prescribed fire purposes or for wildfire response. And they can vary in their level of detail. So this one to the right is the burn map that we made after the 2023 fire on Little St. George Island. And you can see kind of indicated the how much burned in each area. And as we get further away from the house area and into the more complex dune and swale topography, you can see the percent burned is only 30 to 40% in this southern sea zone. And that's just reflective of kind of the patchiness that occurs in burns in this kind of ecological system. Now I will say, for ANER's purposes, we like some detail, but there are people who are doing, especially if you're doing more detailed fire research, who may go out and walk miles and miles every single polygon to capture smaller areas that did or didn't burn throughout a burn zone. And we're also using We're using unmanned aerial systems and other mapping technologies to help us with this effort. The picture on the left is two of our stewardship staff who are walking around with a Trimble to mark points that burned. And then we also have been working on starting a drone program here at Ainer. So part of it is for things like vegetation monitoring, but drones can also be used to get a great bird's eye view of what happened in a burn zone, especially if it's an area you might not be able to reach very easily on foot. But if you can send the drone in the air up to see. And so I'm once again going to switch applications quickly and see if I can show you a video that we took in the fall after the fire on Little St. George Island. Now I know there might be some issues with the video lagging, but even if you're only getting still frames, I hope that you can kind of see the patchiness. You can really see the dune and swales from this bird's eye view, but you can see how the burn is patchy. Areas burn and some don't. And then another point I just want to make, I know some of the trees you can see are orange, dead needles. Just because the tree has orange needles is certainly not dead. It's natural after a fire for the tree to drop its needles, and they'll come back the next year. But yeah, again, you can see some orange trees and plenty of green ones as well. So this is the area that's being shown right now is the marsh out towards the old lighthouse point. You can see the grass around the marsh carried the fire really well. And you can actually see the tide was pretty low the day we took this. So you can see a few of the bricks in the water still from the base of, that's where the lighthouse stood. So I don't want to show the whole thing. It's about a 5-minute long video. But again, we were able to use this. We were able to walk some areas interior to do this burn mapping, but also use this to help us get that better estimate of that, what percentage of this area did burn from the fire and what percentage did not burn. All right, so just going to pop back to the end of PowerPoint and resume the slideshow. Whoop. And then finally, I just want to mention that as I've said, we're trying to reintroduce prescribed fire into our land areas where we have the resources and it's practical. But there are other tools that land managers use if in conjunction with fire, or if fire cannot be introduced to an area. There are other things that we can do to reduce wildfire risk. So we can do hand or mechanical clearing. The picture on the right is one of our new babies. We were able to purchase a Positrack last year, which was more than 10 years in the making, getting this piece of equipment, but that can be used to clear underbrush in areas where we can't use fire to clear the underbrush. And for other management goals, like invasive plant reduction, there's other techniques we can use to reduce invasives besides fire, including hand clearing, mechanical clearing, or very targeted herbicide application. Just depends, again, what you're trying to do in that area. Conservation grazing is a relatively new idea in coastal land managers. So this is a project that Ainer has been involved in for several years. The first portion of the project involved a lot of the stewardship community from national estuarine research reserves across the Gulf of Mexico. And a lot of the community is interested in using grazing and found that there has not been a lot of research done in the area. You know, if you want to use, can you use goats or sheep or horses even, you know, in coastal systems to reduce the understory? Will goats really eat everything? How many goats would you need to try to reduce understory in a certain area? There's a lot of questions and not a lot of research. So the first project that was completed a few years ago was really kind of a needs assessment. But ANER is part of a proposal to do some more applications of conservation grazing with you know, measure to really do the science and see how it works and measure the effects of grazers. So it's just in the proposal stage, but we'll see what happens with that. It's certainly an up and coming field I hear about more and more in land management and especially when it comes to invasive species. Um, and so that's all I have. I will say we did have an intern three years ago, Madeline Sauce, who made a, a story map that kind of focuses more in on the photo points and photo point monitoring. So she was looking at some of the photo points on Little St. George Island post Hurricane Michael, and also in the Unit 4 area. So that's a public story map. So I'm going to drop the address for that in the chat while we take questions. And if you're interested, you can visit that and kind of look over, learn more information about these areas and see some of more photo point monitoring in those areas as well. And with that, I'll put that link in the chat and take any questions anyone might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. That was wonderful. And if we have any questions, if you just want to come off, if you want to unmute yourself and ask, or you can raise your hand if you're not sure. I see Anthony has his hand raised. You able to come off mute, Anthony? Says he's
Oh, can
self-muted.
you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so my name's Anthony. I'm over here on Alligator Point area, so on the opposite end of the county. And basically, what I was just trying to find out is, do we have like, because I know that like right now the Brazilian pepper tree is kind of a big thing, and it's kind of overgrown, a noxious bush that we have in the area. And I was just trying to find out, is there any like inmate hand crews in this area? Because like I have experience working out west as a wildland fireman, and we had a lot of inmate hand crews that would go out and do like some of the work, the fuels reduction work. And I was just wondering if there's any in this area, since because like we struggle, like our volunteer fire department kind of struggles to keep up. And I was just trying to figure out if there's like on like county owned parcels, who does that, like the mitigation part for the county itself.
Um, so thanks for the question, Anthony. I can't speak directly for the county, but to my knowledge, the county doesn't have any invasive species targeted um,
Okay.
groups or work that's going on, but as I said, that's to my knowledge. So
Okay.
um, yeah.
Yeah.
Now over there, you do have this the state park, which is also managed by DEP, and so within the state park, I believe they do invasives control, both mapping and then control efforts where they're able and where it's practical.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Because I just, it's a little different out here, and I was just trying to figure out who's like who's. I see that the state park does a lot of prescribed burning, and they do actually a really good job because they're like their ladder fuels. You know that all that underbrush is pretty much it looks it's taken care of for the most part. And I was just trying to figure out like a lot of these county owned parcels, who's doing that, but it doesn't seem like the state steps in and does that. It's kind of like on the county that has to do it themselves, I'm assuming. Oh
Mm.
yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah, I believe on county property, I mean, it would be up to the county.
Okay.
And I will say also, I mean, you we're talking about fire with Brazilian pepper in particular because you mentioned it. Brazilian pepper is quite nasty. And
Yeah.
for reduction of Brazilian pepper, you would probably also need to consider chemical applications.
Yeah, like either killing it or actually cutting it out, like bush hogging it down and then putting some chemical on top because it's like nasty stuff. I had it
Y-
when I moved into my house. I've been here about 9 months and it was full of Brazilian pepper trees. The whole thing, the whole property
Mm.
was taken over. So, but yeah, I'm just thinking more because of the residential area. If somebody lights like a fire, because we have a lot of tourists in the area, and and they come and if they light a fire and something happens and it's wind driven, it could be a bad thing for like the these barrier islands or like
Mm.
Saint Teresa area and stuff like that. So I just was thinking like that on that aspect, emergency response.
I mean, the
Yeah.
county will issue when there are droughts and such. The county might issue burn bans at certain times.
And
But of course,
do they
yes.
have do they have
Oh,
any code enforcement? Like, do they go out and say, "Hey, look, this property owner is being like I guess like not taken care, or it's overgrown, there could be squatters living in, and then do they have code enforcement where they mitigate those efforts on county owned land? That's like, does the county do that?
Franklin County does not have a code enforcement officer.
Okay.
So my understanding is that they would work with the sheriff's department if they believe that someone is in violation of a law or ordinance.
Whatever ordinance is in place, I'm
Hmm.
assuming. Okay. Yeah, I'm
Yes.
trying to figure it out because I just moved here and I'm like, it's a little different down here. But I was just trying to figure out like if there like how we could make the community safe. And like I saw that there's USA Firewise communities, and I was
Hmm.
trying to see if like that would be if I could bring that to the board of the fire department and say, hey, let's try to go to become Firewise in the state of Florida. Just trying
Yeah,
to
no,
incorporate that.
that's a great goal. I mean, as you said, you can reach out to your fire department, and then also I would just encourage you to reach out to your county representatives to
But
let them know that it's something that you're concerned about
interesting.
and want to know
Okay.
more.
Okay, perfect. Okay, that's what I was trying to figure out. Okay, perfect. Thank you for all the information. It was great. I loved listening to it. Learned a lot.
Thank you. I'm
Great,
glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah. Okay.
great. You don't have any, okay, I think, okay. Nithya, you want to come off mute?
Hello, can you hear
Yes,
me?
yes, we can.
Hi, awesome. I'm an undergrad student at Yale, but I'm from Georgia, and I'm really interested in the conservation practices in the Apalachicola. But I don't know a lot about fire management, so I really appreciate the talk. It was really interesting. But I'm curious about fire lines and breaks, and I was wondering about what factors go into deciding um, like what natural boundaries are considered breaks and are roads and access roads used as natural breaks when deciding boundaries for prescribed burns.
Great question. Um, yeah, so I think there's a lot that goes into considering what are boundaries and breaks, or what you would use as your fire lines. I think a lot of it depends on the size of the area that you're managing. So since I mentioned, we kind of have these smaller parcels that we manage with ANER. Having lines around them is important, but also maybe access points in the middle. But when you look at other managed areas, like maybe the state and national forests, as I mentioned, we have quite a few down in this area in the Panhandle, but I know extending up into Georgia where you're from, there's a lot of larger forest areas. And so you have to kind of look at your zones. They're in the state and national forest here. There are roads that are double as fire breaks. You know, so yes, they're access roads, but they absolutely double as fire breaks or fire lines. Again, it might just depend on the natural area. Sometimes you have to sort of go with practicality as well. You know, you're like, well, maybe if I was designing breaks now in this parcel, I might move this line a quarter mile or a half mile this way, but I already have a line here. So you have to, you know, just think about what kind of effort it would take to move a line somewhere else or add a line, and then maintain the line. You know, you need to be able to get equipment through, or having a fire line through a really wet area can be problematic if when it's wet, you won't be able to get equipment through there. Yeah, there's a lot of things that go into that kind of consideration. And you mentioned you're from Georgia and you're up at Yale. So I grew up in the Northeast too, and in the Southeast, it's just a very different fire landscape too. Since we have a lot more of kind of open public lands and big state forests in the Southeast, the fire management is just sort of a whole different mindset. You're just in a really different area of the country down here in the Southeast. Thanks for the question.
Thank you so much for the information. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're at 4 o'clock, so if we don't have any further questions, wanted to take a minute to thank Alicia Bruno. She's our producer, and she has helped me with this series for 2 years now, but she's going on to bigger and better things, so we say goodbye to her. And thank our speaker, Megan, and we hope to see you back on April 25th, when we'll have Bria Bryant, an archaeologist with the University of West Florida, is going to talk to us about the archaeology she's doing around the Negro Fort, Prospect Bluff, and that should be a really fascinating talk. So she's in the process of getting her master's degree, and her thesis is on that. So we welcome you back then. So thank you so much, Megan and Alicia and everybody for attending.